The supreme illusion of the industrial titan is the deeply held belief that capital can overwrite reality. When you command a global empire, the balance sheet begins to look like a magic wand. You start to believe that enough money can bend biology, geography, and human nature to your absolute will. This is the precise moment when the architect of wealth unknowingly engineers their own systemic destruction. By 1928, Henry Ford stood at the absolute zenith of industrial supremacy. The Model T had completely revolutionized human mobility, and his sprawling assembly lines in Detroit operated with the relentless precision of a Swiss timepiece. Yet, his empire possessed a fatal, hidden vulnerability. Every vehicle rolling off his line required tires, hoses, and gaskets, making him entirely dependent on an external supply chain he could not command. A European cartel held an ironclad stranglehold on the global latex market. British and Dutch plantations in Southeast Asia dictated the price of raw materials, effectively levying a private tax on the American automotive boom. To a mind obsessed with vertical integration, this dependency was an intolerable systemic risk. The solution was not to negotiate a better contract, but to capture the raw material at its very source. The strategy manifested as a staggering acquisition of 2.5 million acres deep within the Amazon rainforest. The objective was to build a sovereign supply chain, completely bypassing the European monopoly to secure endless, cheap rubber. The project was christened Fordlandia. It was not merely an agricultural venture. It was an audacious attempt to export the rigid, predictable logic of the factory floor directly into the untamed heart of the jungle. The fatal miscalculation occurred the exact moment the first tractor broke ground. The jungle is a complex, chaotic biological environment optimized for survival through extreme decentralized diversity. Ford approached it as if it were simply a barren factory floor lacking a roof. He fundamentally believed that the same principles of mechanical standardization that produced millions of identical cars could be flawlessly applied to living, breathing organisms. In manufacturing, maximum efficiency is achieved by eliminating space between identical units to speed up production. Applied to agriculture, this meant planting millions of rubber trees in perfectly straight, densely packed rows. But in the wild, these trees naturally grow far apart precisely to prevent the rapid spread of specialized predators. The industrial layout completely bypassed the natural evolutionary quarantine system of the forest entirely. This architectural failure of Henry Ford's rubber plantation reveals the absolute limits of top-down corporate management. You cannot impose a centralized, mechanical order onto a decentralized organic network without triggering a massive, immediate systemic rejection. The assembly line thrives on isolation, predictability, and total control, while the rainforest operates on interconnected chaos, constant mutation, and fluid adaptation to environmental stress. The executive hubris extended far beyond the agricultural layout. Ford did not just want to harvest latex, he wanted to manufacture a specific type of society from the ground up. He shipped the physical components of a Midwestern American town thousands of miles downriver. Clapboard houses, paved sidewalks, fire hydrants, and even a golf course were dropped into an environment with a radically different climate and cultural history. This was the absolute apex of corporate paternalism. The underlying psychological trap is the arrogant assumption that economic leverage automatically grants the moral authority to dictate human behavior. Management truly believed that adopting American cultural habits would automatically instill American industrial efficiency in the local workforce. They actively sought to re-engineer the soul of the worker right alongside the soil of the jungle. Local laborers were forced to abandon their traditional, climate-appropriate diets for mandatory rations of oatmeal, canned peaches, and brown rice. They were required to live in sweltering, tin-roofed houses designed specifically to trap heat during Michigan winters. Most destructively, they were forced to adhere to a strict 9-to-5 schedule, working under the punishing midday tropical sun instead of the cooler, traditional early morning hours. When corporations try to build cities, they almost always design them for maximum financial extraction rather than sustainable human habitation. Treating people as interchangeable cogs in a mechanical system generates immense, invisible friction. The psychological toll of forced cultural assimilation, combined with brutally uncomfortable physical conditions, created a massive powder keg of resentment that no amount of daily wages could ever hope to diffuse. Capital can easily purchase manual labor, but it can never purchase submission to a fundamentally alien reality. The attempt to force a foreign social architecture onto an indigenous population is a profoundly inefficient use of resources. It requires constant surveillance, endless punitive enforcement, and a total blinding disregard for the organic social structures that actually sustain human communities over generations. The mounting social friction inevitably ignited into outright violence. In 1930, the rigid social order completely collapsed during a massive riot sparked by the terrible cafeteria food. Workers smashed the dining hall, cut the telegraph wires to prevent communication, and chased the terrified American managers deep into the jungle. The Brazilian military had to be called in to suppress the uprising and restore order to the shattered compound. While the social structure was violently tearing itself apart, the biological structure was quietly and ruthlessly disintegrating. The densely packed rows of trees became an all-you-can-eat buffet for the South American leaf blight. Microscopic fungi swept rapidly through the plantation, decimating the canopy and utterly destroying the yield. The industrial layout had accidentally engineered the absolute perfect environment for a total biological collapse. History uses the ruins of this ambitious project as a permanent warning against the closed-loop corporate utopia. When an organization attempts to forcefully control every variable of existence, from the global supply chain down to the private lives of its workers, it systematically strips away the vital resilience found in natural systems. Hyper-optimization always breeds catastrophic fragility when introduced to the real world. The architect of capital frequently suffers from a blinding case of domain dependence. Because Henry Ford had masterfully conquered the physics of steel and combustion, he arrogantly assumed his genius transferred seamlessly to botany and sociology. He surrounded himself entirely with loyal executives who blindly enforced his vision, completely ignoring the desperate warnings of botanists and locals who actually understood the unforgiving terrain. Vast wealth cannot alter the fundamental laws of physics, biology, or human nature. It can only amplify the disastrous consequences of ignoring them on a much larger scale. The millions of dollars poured into the Amazon basin did not conquer the jungle. They merely accelerated the destruction of the underlying asset. The capital simply became a highly efficient engine for its own rapid incineration. After nearly 2 decades of continuous bleeding hemorrhage, the brutal reality of the situation could no longer be denied by anyone. In 1945, the project was finally and quietly abandoned. The land was sold back to the Brazilian government at a staggering, humiliating loss. Despite the immense expenditure of corporate capital and human effort, the plantation never produced a single commercially viable yield of latex. Today, the rusting water towers and decaying factory buildings of Fordlandia are slowly but surely being swallowed whole by the jungle. They stand as a silent, haunting testament to the absolute limits of industrial power. The forest rapidly reclaimed the land precisely because the forest operates on a vastly superior logic of adaptation, easily outlasting the brittle, unyielding structures of extreme corporate vanity. Modern conglomerates continue to make exactly the same systemic errors today. They aggressively attempt to architect closed digital and physical ecosystems, dictating every variable of their employees' lives and their fragile global supply chains. They treat complex, evolving social networks as simple engineering problems to be solved, entirely forgetting that rigid systems are always the very first to shatter under unexpected stress. The intoxicating illusion of the omnipotent balance sheet completely blinds leadership to the unquantifiable, messy variables of culture, ecology, and human autonomy. When the pristine financial spreadsheet inevitably conflicts with the dirt of reality, reality always wins. You cannot model the unpredictable complexities of a living system on a two-dimensional forecast without inviting spectacular disaster. True, enduring mastery of capital requires knowing exactly where your power ends. The ultimate lesson hidden deep in the Amazon is that the most formidable wealth is built by aligning with complex systems, not by arrogantly attempting to pave over them. The brilliant architect does not fight the current of nature, they engineer a sophisticated way to let the current do the heavy lifting.